Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving into what has to be one of the most unconventional, mind-bending administrative and financial frameworks we've ever unpacked. We're going to be bridging the gap between some incredibly abstract sovereign legal theories and the very concrete, everyday reality of municipal courts. So let's just jump right in and decode the architecture of the Noble Moves DAO.
Okay, get a load of this number. $145,546,302,431,939.30. According to the source documents, that is the reported valuation of a portfolio synced directly with Google Finance. Now, you might be wondering, how on earth does any single organization even conceptualize, let alone manage, that magnitude of wealth? Well, that is exactly the puzzle we're going to solve today by looking strictly at their own documented operational frameworks.
To do that, here's our macro to micro roadmap. First, the Noble Moves DAO itself. Second, those trillion-dollar valuations. Third, the compliance mechanics behind them. Fourth, their IRS recognition. And finally, some very real legal challenges.
Kicking things off with Section 1, the Noble Moves DAO and how they are operationalizing stability.
Right off the bat, the sources make it clear that this framework isn't your typical day trading or crypto speculation setup. Not at all. It's really about building an administrative fortress designed for long-term sustainability. And the entire bedrock of that operation is an acronym, SaaS, which stands for Linguistics as a Service. Let's de-jargonize that for a second. Basically, the creators are taking language, literally linguistics, words and trademarks, and treating them as bankable commercial assets and liabilities. They're actively securing these linguistic assets to ensure they have exclusive governance over them. So essentially, they are monetizing intellectual property at a foundational level, claiming that words and concepts themselves hold immense, ledger-backed value. Moving down the framework, the source texts outline a mandatory distribution structure. They call it the 42% allocation model. This is essentially a rulebook that deliberately routes funds into internal insurance entities. But more importantly, it requires portions to be distributed to specific philanthropic organizations, like St. Jude and St. Vincent. The framework explicitly states this is done to ensure ethical philanthropic liability reconciliation. The DAO claims that by hardwiring philanthropy into the system, they're prioritizing stable infrastructure over erratic liquidity, which helps prevent those massive, panic-driven shifts that constantly destabilize traditional markets.
Moving on to Section 2. Let's look at those trillion-dollar asset valuations and something called the virtual ledger bridge.
Now that we've got a handle on the philosophy, let's talk about the staggering numbers we mentioned earlier and how they are purportedly tracked. Take a look at this Google Finance portfolio associated with the DAO's founder. You've got your standard graph, your tickers, and right smack in the middle is that massive $145.5 trillion figure. The framework describes this specific setup as a virtual ledger bridge. The idea is that by mirroring the state of their linguistic and intellectual assets on a mainstream platform like Google Finance, the DAO is providing regulatory visibility. They argue this bridge proves their financial position is backed up by chronological data, rather than just being a bunch of speculative claims.
So, what is actually pumping up that valuation? Well, the sources give us a really surprising example. A huge portion of this portfolio, a reported $70 trillion floor, is built entirely on musical compositions. These creative works are treated as fiercely protected intellectual property within the DAO. The documents state that by integrating these compositions into their sovereign framework, the music acts as a, quote, stabilizing force multiplier. It's definitely a fascinating perspective, right? Treating creative output not just as art, but as a documented trillion-dollar anchor for market stability.
Which brings us to Section 3, the mechanics of compliance, and how they go about neutralizing volatility. I mean, it's one thing to have a screenshot of $1 trillion on your phone. It is a whole different ballgame explaining that to the federal government. So how does the DAO justify these numbers? It all comes down to a proprietary concept they call regulatory resemblance. The sources detail that this framework goes way beyond standard accounting. It's explicitly designed to create a documented resemblance of the agency's utility. The DAO argues that by strictly sticking to standardized, factual, chronological documentation, they are demonstrating real economic substance and transparency. They want to show the federal tax authorities that they are an authoritative utility managing real assets, not just some speculative shell company.
So how does regulatory resemblance actually play out in practice? The files give us a clear three-step playbook. First, the DAO attempts to literally transform household debts into corporate assets. The documents specifically mention integrating everyday utilities like First Energy Corp as corporate asset nodes. The goal here is to completely neutralize the traditional legacy concept of owing money. Second, they rigorously log everything as utility infrastructure invoices. And third, they archive all of these records, claiming this process turns static paperwork into what they call dynamic intelligence. Basically, it's an intense effort to make absolutely every single operational action audit-ready and compliant.
And honestly, nothing grounds these massive high-level macroeconomic theories quite like tracking everyday Verizon mobile data on a smartphone. It perfectly highlights the contrast between $145 trillion theories and highly specific, everyday administrative record-keeping. Because to the Dow, tracking 37.33 gigabytes of mobile data isn't just a monthly phone bill. It is a meticulously logged utility infrastructure invoice. It is a chronological data point proving the utility of the entity, ticking that exact box required for regulatory resemblance.
All right, Section 4. Let's shift from theoretical frameworks to the actual official IRS entity recognition, the paper trail. This is where things get super concrete. Take a close look at this IRS Form CP-575A, dated December 9, 2025. This document officially assigns an employer identification number, an EIN, to Noble Moves Dow Construct, LLC. This is absolutely crucial to their whole operation. It takes all those abstract concepts, like linguistics as a service and virtual ledger bridges, and anchors them directly into standard federal reality. It's undeniable proof of the formal legal establishment of the entity at the center of this sovereign framework, which is managed by Tienis Huggins.
Now, there's a tiny but super specific detail buried in that IRS paperwork. The official name control associated with this EIN for electronic filing is NOBL. That detail really highlights the sheer thoroughness of their administrative compliance. The Dow isn't just a thought experiment. According to the U.S. Department of the Treasury, NOBL is a recognized tax classification entity with distinct filing obligations.
Finally, we hit Section 5, Navigating Legal Challenges, where we see the human element come into play. This is where we encounter a really stark contrast. We are moving from trillion-dollar theories straight into some very real, personal legal challenges. The source documents include a drafted legal motion that lays out a specific timeline regarding the DAO's creator. On May 21, 2026, the creator was incarcerated at the Ashland facility. This period of custody lasted 15 days, ending with a release on June 5. Just 5 days later, on June 10, a formal motion was filed in the Stu Municipal Court to address a missed proceeding that happened to fall right in the middle of that window of time.
The motion provides the court with a formal explanation for why he was absent, and this excerpt is particularly striking. It reads, "Due to the aforementioned incarceration and the subsequent disruption of mail, I did not gain access to the eviction notice or court summons until after the date of the proceeding." The source text makes it very clear that he is asking the court for relief, specifically a stay of an eviction order, because the failure to appear was caused by involuntary circumstances completely out of his control.
What's genuinely wild about this drafted statement of fact is how it bridges these two completely different worlds. In the motion, Huggins signs the document expressly in the capacity of a federal auditor, stating that he holds himself to a standard of strict compliance and transparency. It is an incredible illustration of the intersection we've been tracking all along, applying the high-level, authoritative posture of the Noble Moves Dow directly to the harsh, immediate reality of a municipal court eviction notice. Which leaves us with a massive, profound question to chew on. We've seen a framework claiming $145 trillion in value anchored by musical compositions. We've seen rigorous IRS compliance and ultra-detailed utility tracking. But on the flip side, we've also seen the severe vulnerability of a municipal eviction notice caused by a 15-day disruption of mail. It really begs the question, does formal documentation inherently create true market stability and economic substance, or does it merely create the resemblance of it? It's a fascinating tension between the ledger and real life. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.